Hi, I'm Marianne Williamson, and the tape you're about to hear is a live lecture I gave based on the ideas in a self-study program of spiritual psychotherapy called A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles is not a religion, but a psychological training in the relinquishment of a thought system based on fear and the acceptance instead of a thought system based on love.
Together we all take a very deep breath. We close our eyes. We see in the middle of our mind a little ball of golden light. We watch this light as it begins to grow larger and larger, until now it covers the entire inner vision of our mind. We see for ourselves within this light a beautiful temple. We see a garden that surrounds the temple and a body of water that flows through the garden. We see that the inside of the temple is lit by this same beautiful golden light. We are here for we have been drawn together by the power and in the presence of God. We devote our time spent together and our relationships to one another to Him. We ask that His Holy Spirit, which is within us, so guide our thoughts and feelings and perceptions, that we might grow to become happier and more peaceful and more loving men and women. Thank you very much. We all say, Amen. The topic that I would like to discuss tonight is self-love. And loving ourselves is something that I definitely put in the category of easier said than done. And I want to tell you first what the Course in Miracles has to say about it, and then to discuss why what the Course in Miracles has to say about it is so hard to grok, Because what the Course in Miracles says is that, there's this one lesson that's repeated. We'll do it later tonight. It's the one lesson in the Course in Miracles that is repeated several times. And what that is I am as God created me. And what the Course in Miracles means when it says, I am as God created me, is look, God made me perfect. God only creates more of what He is. He's perfect, completely innocent, completely lovable. In the Course in Miracles it says, a man should think of himself as totally loving and totally lovable because that's what he really is. The Course in Miracles says your perfection is established by God. What God creates a certain way, that is what it is, and nothing that you do can change that. Nothing that you do, no mistake you've ever made makes you less perfect. No mistake you've ever made makes you less lovable, because what makes you lovable isn't what you do. What makes you lovable is what you are. And that's not to any credit. I always say to people, don't feel like it's arrogant for you to accept that you're perfect. It's really, we're not giving you the credit. God made you perfect. You've made mistakes. We've all made mistakes, but your perfection doesn't have to do with the realm of this body. Your perfection isn't established by anything of this world. Your perfection is of the kingdom of heaven, which means your spiritual nature. Now, that's all very nice, but it's not what Mommy and Daddy told us, that's for sure. So most of us were taught, at least what was strongly implied, even if it wasn't verbally communicated, is that we were wonderful because we made good grades, or we were wonderful because we cleaned up after ourselves, or we were wonderful because we did what Mommy and Daddy asked us to do after school. We were always taught that our lovableness was based on performance. And one way or the other, right? That our lovableness was based on that was very good of you. Very rarely were we taught, you're just good. Some children are brought up that way, and that's real conscious parenting. When children are just loved for what they are, but most of us are really taught, if you do the right thing, it's all smiles, and if you do the wrong thing, you get a lot of the looks and all that kind of stuff. So what happens is that we grow up, Freud had a term superego. And what superego is in Freudian jargon is the idea that when we're children, certain tapes are played, and those tapes are Mommy and Daddy talking. And the way the superego operates is that long after Mommy and Daddy aren't even in the picture anymore, you took up where they left off. So the tape is still playing. But it's even worse, because Mommy and Daddy really never judged you the way you start judging yourself. right? So what happens is that you still have those tapes playing, but you became the critic. You became the judge. So that instead of it being, you're good if you clean up, or you're good if you help daddy after school, or you're good if you made good grades, you're good if you got the job, you're good if they still love you, right? You're good if you make the money. Our mind is still looking to things outside of us that then we can say, I'm good because that's working well. Right? I'm good. I can point to that. I made some money. I must be good. They said they liked me. I must be good. I got the job. I must be good. What that means is, it's like in the Bible, that great thing where Jesus said, if you build your house on sand, then the rains come, the winds come, and you are blown away. But if you build your house on rock, winds come, rains come, and you remain firm. Now, when you think that you're only lovable if stuff out there is going well, and so then you can say, well, I deserve to approve of myself, because after all, look what I did. Then that's building your house on sand, because it's building your sense that you're worthy on something that happens out here rather than what you are. And so definitely it means that the winds come and the rains come, you're blown away, because it means that if they're not with you anymore, if they move on, so the relationship is not the same form and you still wanted it, you just die inside. You think it means you're not worthy. Right? Or you got fired from a job, you're not worthy. You lost the money, you're not worthy. You're not loving yourself. And then you start attacking yourself. You're attacking yourself because your sense of yourself is based on the same thing that your parents' sense of yourself was. Your parents based their approval of you on what you did and what was shown outside, your grades or whatever, so now you've started doing that. So what's the way out of that? Well, it gets the ego mind is very powerful. Because what tends to happen there is that we go into depression. And this is very interesting. Something happens, you didn't get the job, you get depressed. Or you lost the money, you get depressed. The relationship broke up, you get depressed. And sometimes you are clear that your depression is not totally about what happened. You have this vague sense that you're depressed for more than it seems. Well, that's true. Because what you're really depressed about is just that you were looking, your whole sense of yourself was based on what was going on. So when that wasn't there, your mind, what's really happening is not that you lost the money, but that your mind is saying you're no good unless you make the money. See, now that's real important to know. Of course, you're not upset for the reason you think. You're not upset because you lost the job. You're upset because you think that the job made you valuable. You're not upset because you lost a relationship. You're upset because you think that you're no good if you lose a relationship, right? So you start getting depressed. Well, it takes a real self-loving person to allow themselves to be depressed. So here you are without enough self-love anyway, because you weren't really taught to love yourself based on what you are. So all of a sudden you start getting real depressed, let's say, based on the fact that things aren't going so well outside. Well, your ego mind doesn't really want you to look at what the depression signifies. Now, this gets into the whole issue of the allowance of emotion. Because remember, there's a real difference between stuffing an emotion and transcending an emotion. Stuffing an emotion is it hurts too much, I'll just repress it. And there are a lot of different ways that we repress it. One of the ways is just people who just become real rigid and just repress it and don't feel it. Other people, my own personality is I'll just move fast, right? I'll just go do something, just always moving. And in this society, or I'll turn on the radio, or I'll turn on the television, or we turn on the music, just not to deal with it, right? It's not so much that you repress it, but you just remain out of contact with it because you don't want to feel it, right? Well, you don't transcend emotions that way. You just don't deal with them, and then they'll have to come up later. Transcending an emotion is where you have what it takes to feel it. Right? And that means that you're going to sit down and be depressed. Well, the interesting thing is, emotion always has something to tell you. That's the interesting thing. If you're in pain, there's a reason for it. So, if you were going to say, well, I'm lovable, not because of what I do, but because of what I am, and going to take that real seriously, then you're going to create a context. One of the things I was thinking about somebody once, and was in a relationship a long time ago. And I was thinking about the fact they didn't feel that I really expressed enough interest in their life. And I said, that's not true. I expressed a lot of interest. I was always asking what was going on. But I didn't really, it's like I say here a lot, you can't say communication occurred just because you said something. Communication occurred if you created the context where their heart was open to hear what you had to say. Well, you can't say you showed somebody consideration just because you stopped for a second to ask how they are. Right? You show somebody consideration if you really put feet to your prayers, really make it real, make it down to the earth by sitting down long enough, creating enough of a context where somebody can feel more stimulated to share. Right? Well, if you don't do that to yourself, no wonder you don't have the kind of stuff that it takes to do it for someone else. Because real self-love means knowing that what you have to say is meaningful. But what you have to say, I don't mean just intellectually. Because if you think, for instance, what my thing would be is, maybe my ego is saying, well, I'm lovable because I can intellectually articulate something, but I'm not lovable because I can intellectually articulate something. That would be my ego. Because then my ego would say, well, all of a sudden, if I wasn't doing lectures, I don't have anything to love myself for. The issue is that you're not lovable because of any of your works. You're lovable because you are a child of God. And so you deserve to make enough space for yourself. That's what a real home is, That's a real meaning of home. And that's the real meaning when we say come home to God. Because really, letting God love you is really actually the same thing as loving yourself. Your relationship to God really is your relationship to yourself. Because relationship to God is a relationship to your whole mind. And so one of the things that you've heard me say here before, many times we talk about how if you want to have a relationship to God, having a relationship to God is just like having a relationship to anybody else. You cultivate it. Sometimes people will say to me, well, how come you feel like you hear God so much? And I said, because I talk to Him all the time. You know what I'm saying? You cultivate a relationship. And it's the same in the relationship to yourself. But if you are always avoiding being with yourself, see, what I would do, I think, what a lot of us do is to ourselves what we do to other people. I want to be with you if you're feeling happy, right? I want to be with you if it's not going to be a confront to go through whatever you're going through. But self-love means, no, I'll sit down and spend the time with you even when you're not feeling so good. Because what you do with another person, if they're not feeling so good and you really want to support them and help them and care for them, is you sit down and you really listen to what it is that they're going through. So if you love yourself, it's the same thing. You really sit down and listen to what you are going through, knowing that even if it's pain, that if you follow the questions long enough, why the pain? What does this feel like? What does it mean? That's what brings forth awareness. That's the only way that we can grow. There is no other growth than through awareness. So when you do that for yourself, you take the time to do that for yourself, then it brings you into a position of relationship with yourself. Sometimes in relationship with other people, you realize, you hear this about people who get divorced after all these years, of the husband or the wife. One of them says, I feel like I was never loved by you. And the other person is just like shocked, what do you mean? And the husband or the wife says, I've grown from you. You didn't even notice that I grew away from you. Because you haven't given me enough attention on a daily basis to really ask what I was going through. And sometimes we do that with ourselves. We're out doing in the world, and we don't really take the time to ask ourselves what we feel. And there's a certain kind of asking of what we feel that is on a level of beingness that is contrary to the level of doingness. And there's a certain kind of doingness you think that you have to do in order to be lovable, but the truth of the matter is your doingness itself is keeping you from the deep contact with yourself that will really allow yourself to feel how lovable you are. Because it's when you're being rather than doing, sometimes in those spaces where you're not doing anything that the world would point to and say you're very good because you did that. Do you know what I'm saying? Just in your own, the smelling of the flowers and all those kind of Zen things. We're not a generation that really necessarily knows how to slow down. Because what we're talking about here is living in the present. Living with a sense of wonderment. See, we're restless minds and we're always seeking to go somewhere else or do something else because we don't really want to live fully in the present. We don't want to live fully in the present, the Course says, because you live fully in the present and you don't have an ego anymore. Now, if you don't have an ego anymore and you're living fully in the present, that's enlightenment. That's what the ego doesn't want you to do. But in order to love yourself, you have to live fully in the present. In order to love yourself, see, the love that you will experience, the Course says you're not going to experience anything out there that you don't experience in here. So if you only let yourself have a little portion of the joy of being you, you're only going to let yourself have a little portion of joy in the world. But if you start knowing that there's really allowing yourself to know that all joy is already within you, all abundance is already within you because you're a perfect being, and to allow yourself in that sense to have a sense of communion with yourself, kind of making love with yourself, then I think that the spaces are open that you can start to realize more that's out there. The world itself is neutral, remember. It's not like the world is giving you or withholding from you. You are simply perceiving what you're willing to perceive. So if you don't love yourself, what happens is that if you don't have this relationship with yourself that's full of love, then you feel deprived and you start trying to grab it from outside of yourself. And that's what gets real nasty in relationships. You want other people to provide for you what you're not providing yourself. But see, you create what you defend against. You're defending against being lonely, and really what that's going to do is create the conditions of loneliness, because when you are trying to get somebody to love you, it's just not real attractive. It's not what makes people want to love you. What's attractive in people is somebody who genuinely loves themselves. And I don't mean in a selfish way, but in a real healthy way. Now, another way that we keep from really loving ourselves is by doing for, there's a certain, we always talk about how you have to come from a place of loving other people. But the various aspects of what that means are very important to consider, because there is no deeper love. It's like you're not out to fix other people. That's not a real loving position. To fix other people or to, it's like I was reading the other day, it said letting go is not caring for other people, it's caring about other people. And I thought that was very well put. Because sometimes in caring for other people, we get into fixing and enabling. And that's not really coming from the deepest place. Coming from the deepest place, which is coming from self-love, is just sharing. And when you're really coming from a love, if you can't love other people until you love yourself. You can't love yourself until you love other people. They're both true. But if you're coming from a place of just an appreciation of your own processes and a sharing from your own processes, just in order to expand your own sense of your own beingness, it cannot but be something which serves others. See, the most liberating, in any area of your life where you find abundance, you don't have to feel guilty about that. Some people feel guilty about making money because they think, well, who am I to make money? But really, it's a gift to other people in any area of your life, because as abundance is increased in your life, you have more capacity to increase the abundance in others, but even more importantly, you demonstrate to others what is possible in anyone. See, so if you don't understand the way it works and you see somebody else's abundance or success, and it makes you feel less than. But the real point of somebody else's abundance and success is that if they could do it, you could do it. Because all that they did was to allow themselves access to what is possible for all of us. I mean, the Course makes that real clear. There's nobody with more potential for dynamic power than anybody else. The Course says that the holy instant and enlightenment don't bring anything new into your life. It's just when you see that which was already there but you weren't allowing to be expressed. So it's the same with self-love, because when you love yourself, you're not taking from someone else, quite the opposite. You are coming from a place of a sense of fullness of yourself. Remember, in the Course in Miracles it says the highest level of prayer is the prayer for forgiveness. And the prayer for forgiveness is a prayer for the memory of how much you already have. And to pray for the memory of how much you already have really is the prayer for the memory of what you already are. Of course, the problem is that you've forgotten who you are, and you're waiting to prove to yourself, you're waiting to get approval from yourself. And if you're waiting to get approval from yourself based on what you do in the world and what you achieve in the world, that's because somebody in your life probably made you feel that you had to do that. But let me point out to you that whoever in your early life or whatever were constantly making you feel that you had to do something in order to get their approval probably never did give it to you. Because their game was to not give it to you. So it wasn't like you were going to reach that point. I remember there was somebody in my life and I was desperately seeking for this man's approval. And I kept doing stuff to get it, and I kept doing all these things that I felt were major achievements. And finally I realized, Marianne, you could win the Nobel Prize and he'd just pat you on the head and say, she's cute. I mean, there was no way I was going to get anything other than a patronizing response. I was never going to get what I wanted. That just wasn't what was being played there, right? So the issue is, if you're waiting to get your approval based on what you do, if you're into that kind of game, you'll never give it to yourself. So if you're really going to approve of yourself, it's got to be not because of what you do, but because of what you are. And not only that, it's blasphemous not to do it, in case that matters. Because the Course says your thinking is so upside down, you probably think it's really humble to say, well, I'm nothing. The Course says that is not humble. That is arrogant. Because if you say, well, I'm nothing, you're implying that you're not what God created, that you're something else. Because God didn't create anything that's nothing. And for you to think you made yourself is humble. As I've always said to myself, you can't even make a souffle. How you could think that you made yourself? Right? That's the Course says we have this authorship problem. And self-love is based on recognizing who authored you. So God doesn't, you see, that's why God tells us to forgive other people. God is asking us to love other people the way He loves us. He doesn't love you because you didn't mess up. He loves you in spite of the fact you messed up. Your messing up is irrelevant because you have never messed up in here. You've only messed up out here. And the only reason you messed up out there was because you weren't clear with what's in here. So to be angry at you is unmerciful. And God is mercy. And that's why it's important to know, once again, the key to self-love in that sense is loving other people. Because the whole point of loving other people is that as you forgive, see, when you have an area that you haven't forgiven yourself for, and you just want to prove of yourself because you did such and such, Course in Miracles says God's going to bring into your life someone who did the same thing. And then if you can forgive them, that will be the way that you forgive yourself. If you can really get that they would have done better if they had known how, then you'll get about yourself that you would have done better if you knew how. It doesn't make you any less perfect, because that's your spiritual being. And that's why the Course tells us that the highest level of consciousness is I need do nothing. I need do nothing. See, we have this total body identification, and we think that I have to do everything. And when the Course in Miracles says your power comes when you realize you don't have to do anything, it's merely recognizing that the creative level of things is not what happens out there. The Course says you don't create your life according to what you do. Not really. You create your life according to what you think. And then as your thought gets straight, you become unparalyzed and you're able to act in the world. And then everything that you do is infused with your energy. So if you're uptight, then if you go out and try to make something happen, your actions will still be uptight. That's the frustration a lot of us have. We keep trying, we keep doing, and we keep doing, but it doesn't get us anywhere. Well, the reason it doesn't get us anywhere is because if we were uptight and constricted, then even though we're doing things, we're carrying the energy which is uptight and constricted. Now, once we really get that we're just simply going out to give love in the world, love opens doors. Love relaxes us. When somebody holds you and loves you and tells you that you're okay, doesn't it just make you relax? Well, if you could learn to love yourself, hold you and love you and tell you that you're okay, it would also make us relax. And when we get to that point, then we realize what it is that we have to give to the world. See, it's real difficult to come out with love to the world if we don't get that perfect love is inside of us, right? And what happens is various areas of my life. What I've seen in my life is that I'm real clear. You see, when I'm giving a lecture on the Course in Miracles, because of my belief about the Course in Miracles, I'm totally clear that that's love, that the Course is love. So when I speak about it, I can come forth with love. But there might be some area in my private life, let's say, where I'm not so sure that what I have to give out is perfect love, right? Because I don't have the same faith in myself that I have in the Course in Miracles, right? So it's a slower road to get to the point of realizing that it's valuable, but really it's the same thing. Because the Course in Miracles is not God. The Course in Miracles is a path to God. It's like when somebody said, at one of my lectures, he said, well, I just have a hard time having faith in God. What I said to him was the Course in Miracles is not asking you to have faith in God. It's asking us to have faith in each other. Because that's where God is. God is not something out there. God is something in here. So to believe in God is to believe in yourself. And to believe in yourself is to believe in God. But it's very difficult. People used to always say to me, believe in yourself, believe in yourself. And I didn't have any sense of what that meant, and I kept trying to believe in myself. But it was hard to believe in myself because I saw all these obvious inadequacies. When I began to realize a belief in myself is just belief in that which is of God within us, then it became a whole different story. And I knew that an expression of my love was merely an expression of God. You know, sometimes I get real amused. Annoyed sometimes, but mostly amused by people being real afraid in this group to talk into the microphone. Right? There's this like shyness I don't want my voice to carry. You know, I'm not sure. It's like saying I'm not sure really that I want to be heard. But the interesting thing about that is on a certain level, that's selfish. It's not about you. It's for other people so that they can hear you. So you really see how a denial of yourself and a denial of a belief in yourself always withholds from others. And a real belief in yourself always contributes to others. Now, in the cultivation of that, it seems to me that it calls for almost a whole different lifestyle. You know, people, you can always tell that people who have a deep relationship with themselves tend to be on sort of firmer ground. Like you can tell when you're in a relationship with someone, or if somebody approaches you for a relationship, and they're just so excited that you're around, they just can't stand it. You go, I don't know, I think you're a little bit too excited. Right? Because what it's really implying is that when I'm alone, I just can't stand it. Right? Well, what's so, you know, it's like, it makes me think, well, what's so bad about being alone with you? You know, I mean, if it's that boring, I don't think, because that's what I said to myself once. I was all upset because a man didn't want to just spend the evening alone with me, and I said to myself, you don't want to spend the evening alone with you. You don't want to spend the evening alone with you. Why would someone else want to? And the reason we don't want to, the reason we don't want to is because there's emptiness there. The reason we don't want to is because there's emptiness there. If you're going to talk about how you are valuable, not because of what you do, but because of what you are, and if you're going to try to get in touch with that, then by definition you have to stop doing. So it's like saying, you know, like the Vipassana meditation places where you go for 10 days and you don't do anything but sit there? Well, I don't know about you, I'm not ready. I'm not. I mean, I've flirted with the 3-day idea, but I can see why it's such a cleansing thing. I can see all the, quote, karma that would get burned. It's obvious why that works, because you just have to sit there and do nothing but just sit there and let it all be. And let all the thoughts that it would drive you crazy on a certain level, but I can certainly see the clarity that would be on the other side of that. Because you would be totally alone with yourself. You would be totally alone with what's really going on under there. And we have been geared from the time that we were children not to do that. And that's what all the Eastern meditation stuff is just the sittingness. Sittingness. I don't know about sittingness. The sitting and the beingness. The just being there with ourselves. And that's what meditation is. That's why we have so much resistance to meditating. That's why for most of us, when we begin, sitting quietly with our eyes closed for 5 minutes is torture. Is that not true? It's like torture. It's like we would much rather, we don't mind reading for 5 minutes. We don't mind reading the exercise for 5 minutes. And that's why so many people say, oh, I did the workbook. I said, what do you mean you did the workbook? Well, I read all the lessons. No, wait a minute. To do the workbook means you read the lessons and then you sat there for the amount of time that it asked you with your eyes closed. Oh, well, right? A lot of people say they do the work, but what they're doing is reading the exercise. And I understand what that means. It's the ego will do anything to keep us from shutting up. And the reason the ego will do anything to keep us from shutting up is because when we do shut up, you know, the Course says in getting to any kind of an enlightened state, you have to go through a ring of fear. And that's the ego saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. The ego will tell you anything, don't do this. Even about meditation, you know, if nothing else, it'll just say, look, meditation is good for some people. It's just not your path. It's just not what's going to do it for you. Do you know what I'm saying? Which is like saying, look, physical exercise works for some people. It just won't work for you. Right? It can't not work. And on the other side of that ring of fear, and what do we always say that you're supposed to say to the ego when it's talking? Thank you. We appreciate it. Exactly. Very good. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing, and to do it anyway. And in that place, when you just go forward, you are going to have to feel that depression. You are going to have to feel that incredible fear that you have, that if you're not doing something, you're nothing. You are going to have to face the fact that, you're going to say, what are you so depressed about that you didn't get this job? You know, the place where I see that that's the most cruel is in people who are in acting. Because that is taking on such a spiritual challenge. Because they have a job and then they don't have a job. And then they have a job and then they don't have a job. And they have a job and they don't have it. It would be very difficult to be in some kind of a career like that. Because you really have to develop the sense that you're worthy and you're valuable and you're lovable even if you don't have a job. But that's a great initiatory opportunity, too, it seems to me, to actually sit there when you don't have a job, to sit there like Van Gogh. Van Gogh, nobody ever did buy his paintings while he was alive. Well, it depressed him, too, actually. So it's not like, it's not like he transcended the experience, but that's certainly the challenge. The challenge is to know, but then nobody knows. I mean, you kind of wonder, did Van Gogh know how great he was anyway? Maybe he knew his painting was, but as far as himself. But that is a challenge to know what is down there. Because the Course in Miracles, Jesus says in the Course in Miracles, he says, you think that if anybody saw the real you, they would recoil in horror because of the hideousness that's under there. And of course, religion has contributed to our thinking about that. Freud himself, because we have these ideas that under there are these wild snakes. If I was really left to my impulses and my instincts, I would do horrible things and be wild and crazy in a real negative way. You wouldn't. Now, there is a level of you that probably would at first because you've been kept down so much. But then under there, if you go deep enough, the Course says, Jesus says in the Course, he says, look, ultimately we're going to have to go down there, that place that you think is so dark and horrible. Ultimately, we're going to have to look down there because you're going to have to see that all that's under there is light. You have this fear that something terrible is under there in you. The real you is horrible if people only saw the real you. And he says you're going to have to see the real you in order to know that all that's under there is light. And then, when you realize that all that's under there is light, you will no longer feel if people saw the real me, they would see darkness. Then you will get, if people saw the real me, they would see light, which means that you will want to show other people the real you. And that's heaven. That's why self-love is a key to heaven. Because you have to know that it's okay for people to see the real you in order to get to a position where you want to show them the real you. And showing other people the real you is intimacy. And the cultivation of intimacy. The awareness of our oneness without barriers, and that's heaven. Of course, as heaven isn't a condition or a place. Heaven is what happens when you're really aware that you're one with other people. But you don't get rid of those walls between yourself and other people until you get rid of shame. And what shame is the feeling that if I did tear down my wall, they might see the secret, see my guilty secret. That's what the Course in Miracles really tells us. You think you have this guilty secret. And another interesting thing that it says about that is that this is a process that is so deep. He tells us in the Course, he says, if you were in some dungeon for years, and all of a sudden somebody came and they took you out of it, they opened the door, they unlocked it, and you come up from the dungeon. And all of a sudden you look around, and for the first time in years you see blue sky, and you see clouds and grass and sunshine, things you hadn't seen for years. Of course, he says, if that was your experience, you wouldn't jump up and down for joy. No, you'd experience some tears, incredible, like just what that would be to all of a sudden see sunshine. Well, I think that's the same when we get close to seeing that within ourselves. Because as long as we have this idea that we're good because of what we did, or something of our bodies have to be perfect, or our money has to be perfect, or something that we do for other people has to be perfect, that's a dungeon. The Course says you're either host to God or hostage to the ego. That's what it means to be hostage to the ego. And if all of a sudden you start recognizing that, hey, you're good in there. There's a lot of love in there. What does it mean? Loving and lovable. That's what it means to see the perfection in yourself, to see you're loving. Recognize how loving you are. Recognize, even if you look at all the history of your relationships in your life, like think about your whole sort of romantic history and relationship history. Stand aside for a second from the idea whether it went wrong or it went right. When you put together all the relationships you've ever had, haven't you loved a lot? Haven't you loved a lot? And I'm not even talking about whether you pulled it off, whether you really did it well and effectively. But just in terms of what you felt in your heart, didn't you love a lot? And that's what you did in a world where you were afraid to do it. Can you imagine how much love you would have already put out by now if the world told you it was okay to do that? So that gives you a little glimpse of how loving you are. And as far as how lovable you are, if you are lovable based on the fact that God created you perfect, then how much more lovable can you be? If you are that loving, the only thing that makes a person lovable is that they are loving, really. And if you are as loving as we just saw that you are, then that's how lovable you are. So to begin to see that is like to begin to come out of the dungeon. To begin, and it's not something where you just jump up and down for joy at recognizing it. It is something where it's kind of an emotional experience to recognize how many years you spent avoiding the relationship with yourself. And knowing how much of your romantic history was a part of that. Your efforts at intimacy with other people so many times were based on your own starvation, your own scarcity and lack based on the fact that there was so much you weren't doing for yourself. Because you weren't doing it for yourself, you were grabbing it from other people and thereby making it more difficult to receive it. So it's like after all this time you recognize, I understand the one real relationship. And that's what the Course says, your only real relationship is your relationship with God. That's what it means to say your relationship with God is your relationship with yourself. Because all that God is the love inside of you. So to have a relationship with God means to have a relationship with the love inside of you. To recognize each day of your life, what is the love that you feel? And to allow yourself to feel it. To allow yourself to feel it. And the love that you want from others. You know, so many times you're getting so much love from others, but you want it to look like a green box and it's coming in a yellow bottle. So you don't let yourself feel it because you're saying if it's not coming in a green box, then it's not really love. But usually if you'll just open your heart and let yourself really hear other people, not what they're saying with their words, but what they're saying in their hearts, usually the people you love do love you. They do. Because people sometimes are in all kinds of situations of love and just don't know how to express it. But that's your experience. And you can allow yourself in your own heart and on the inner planes to have the experience of loving others, regardless of what's going on in the relationship. And you can give yourself the experience of feeling the love from other people. To remember, you can think back in your life of all the people who have ever loved you. And if they ever loved you, they love you now. That's what the Course says. That energy is alive. If anybody has ever loved you, it's a part of you right now. And that includes, even like, let's say your mother. Even all the stuff I saw about my mother, ultimately, when I went into so much anger and stuff that she'd done, ultimately I really did get that even the things that I considered were violations of me in my mother's behavior, I really got that she did it because she thought that was love. Because some people think domination and control is love. And because our mothers taught us that, by the way, that's one of the ways that we become domineering and controlling. And that's not love, of course, but it comes from the impulse that we would love if we knew how. So what this generation is learning about is love. You see, we talk a lot in the spiritual path about loving. But the deeper surrender is to know, well, what does that mean? And what it means is to let somebody go. What it means to let somebody go is to let somebody be. What it means to let somebody be is to not to have an attachment to what they do, not to have an attachment to what they say, just to have an attachment to your vision of them in your heart, which is your love for them. And you get that by knowing that about yourself, letting yourself go. Maybe your parents didn't. Maybe your parents didn't just let you be and love you regardless, not make you perform, but just to be. But we, through awareness, how do you change? By noticing. That's how you change, to notice, just to become more aware, to just let yourself be, to know that you don't have to do, right here in this room right now, you are everything that's perfect. You are in this, you don't have to do anything to achieve greater perfection. You're it right now. Your enlightenment, everybody in this room will one day be an enlightened master. That's what the Course says. One day, everyone in this room will be an enlightened master one day. I'm not saying what lifetime or what eon or what galaxy we'll all be in at that point, but we will be. And the Course in Miracles makes it real clear that it just might be a lot sooner than we think. And the rate things are moving, I can believe that. But the point is that when you are an enlightened master, it won't mean that you're anything other than you are now. It will mean simply that you recognize more fully what is already there. You will simply allow yourself to understand and appreciate all that love that's already there. So anything that you've done is irrelevant to this. You were created perfect eons ago. Nothing God creates changes. You were perfect eons ago and you're perfect right now. Nothing you're ever going to do is going to make you more perfect. Not only is nothing you could do going to make you less perfect, nothing you're going to ever do is going to make you more perfect. It's already here. It's already right now. And if you will allow yourself to see that in your own mind about yourself right now, It will greatly increase your relationships, the vibration, the highness of your relationship with other people. Because the Course says you're only going to see in others what you see in yourself. And if you see guilt in yourself, then you will see guilt in other people. And if you see truth and perfection in yourself, you will see truth and perfection in other people. If you see guilt in yourself, you project guilt onto others. If you see love in yourself, you extend love to others. And when your love of others is based on the fact that maybe they're perfect because you are, after all, then you realize that you are both perfect. There's no separation. There's just this perfect energy. And all the walls drop. And that's heaven. So that's how we can get a little closer to heaven right now, by recognizing that it's already here, by recognizing that perfect life is already here. All this history stuff, personally and collectively, is just a dream we're having. The real us is just sitting here. The real enlightened master in us is just kind of looking down on the whole thing. The real enlightened master in us is not something that we have to become, something we just have to accept. That's why we concentrate on a Jesus or any other enlightened master, because we become what we concentrate on. When you concentrate on a Jesus or another being like that, you're concentrating on perfect love. By concentrating on perfect love, you bring forth the manifestation of perfect love, the vision of perfect love, and that perfect love is already within us. So what is there not to love back? Pure acceptance of ourselves, exactly as we are, just makes us deeper and deeper and deeper, and we just surrender more and more and more, and we relax more and more and more. And it makes us feel much less the need to do anything. And that's when we really understand in the Course when it says, I don't have to do anything. I need not do anything. All will be done through me. All I have to do is relax. And I've long suspected that if the Course in Miracles was to be condensed and just one word that could be said for the whole book would be relax. Just relax. Because what that means is a suspension of doingness. What it means is a suspension of movement. What it means is finding that still small voice within ourselves. As we begin to do that, that won't make us less energized. As we begin to do that, it won't make us less powerful. It will make us much more powerful. Because then we'll really be motivated. Because the Course says that when you really get close to God, you get close to a tremendous motivation to share that experience with others. Then we'll be on purpose. Then we'll know why we're on the earth. We're on the earth to be perfect love, to have the joy and the happiness that comes from knowing that's what we are. And then our mission is to go out and spread that with other people. But you can't spread what you don't have. You can't give what you don't have. And when you really recognize how beautiful you are, then you can begin to show other people how beautiful they are. And that's why it's so important. And that's also why it's time. Because it's time on the earth for everybody to know that they're okay exactly as they are. Thank you very much. Amen.